Hi, this is Cameron, and I'm going to be using Google Slides for my Putting It Together project. First of all, my philosophy and the role that I see myself having as an online or blended learning teacher with online materials is, first of all, I think online teaching is an opportunity for collaborative learning. It's a really great opportunity for that. It's also great for one-on-one learning, and it supports a safer learning environment because the students then have the opportunity to work from home if they feel like they're being bullied in a face-to-face or traditional environment. And unfortunately, with other recent events, it could also prove safer in terms of violence in schools. So it allows students to work from home as opposed to in a building. So it's just, I think, a safer learning environment altogether. So through asynchronous and synchronous communication, individualized learning and collective learning can be facilitated by the teacher. I think it does make it easier to kind of work with the individual and also the entire group, because you can have students doing one thing that you prepared, and you can kind of be at more places at once, which is impossible in a face-to-face environment. But this can also be worked into the blended environment, I think. Secondly, students can work independently and collaboratively to achieve success on assignments designed to include technological tools, authentic learning prompts, and real-world application. So again, this kind of works into how there are different formats, and we can kind of provide them with instructions in different mediums that will allow them to work both independently and collaboratively quite well. And lastly, I think the teacher should act as a facilitator of learning, as a guide, and as an expert in the content area and in the area of technology. So I think one major difference when we compare this with face-to-face or traditional environments is the technology aspect of this. I think it's really important that the teacher be able to help students using technology, especially when it's new, but also do the things that teachers normally do, which is facilitate learning in a student-centered environment, and guide students through the learning as opposed to just providing them with information and hoping that they get it or can do it on their own. So it's very similar, but there are things that change between traditional and online or blended, in my case, which is what I hope to use online teaching for. So my online unit, I chose to base this on the passive voice and subjunctive mood. So that way my students can speak indirectly, which is often important in news or media. So I listed my objectives here, which were use passive voice and subjunctive mood to communicate indirectly, identify indirect speech in written and spoken form, create news-type content including indirect communication, and then my lesson essential questions are: how do we express ideas indirectly? Why is indirect speech important in the news and media? And how do we determine when indirect speech is appropriate or inappropriate? Some of the ways that I would be teaching this material, my asynchronous assignments could include pre-recorded screencasts, news article discussions, readings and reflections and activities, collaborative article and news content creation. And then my synchronous assignments could include grammar lessons and practice, conversation assessments, and video conferences with activities. On the right, I have a picture of just an example website. It's a German website for news articles where my students could get them, read them, and then we could have a discussion about certain articles. That could also involve identifying passive voice or subjunctive one that they see in an article, so how it's written. And then down below I have a Conjugamos practice activity example, which is something that you might see for a grammar lesson or a practice activity. To detail my asynchronous tools a little bit more, Screencast-O-Matic I think is something that I would use. This would help me to provide instructions and overviews of content, and also lessons that can be accessed multiple times. So this would help if a student needs to hear instruction more than once. And then that kind of frees up the teacher to work with other students while that student is also getting the information they need again. And then student-created presentations and responses to screencasts could also be facilitated through Screencast-O-Matic. So if students could create their own videos and then kind of respond to those screencasts in maybe a discussion or blog type format. My news article discussion, kind of like what I just mentioned with the website, students will be able to discuss news articles in German through a discussion board or blog space. And this could be a blog on my website or through a learning management system. The next one is readings and reflections / assignments. My students could read news articles and reflect using the grammatical concepts from the unit, or complete activities based on the readings or the grammatical concepts evident in the readings. And then lastly, the collaborative article / news content creation. This could involve students working collaboratively to create a news article or video about an event that includes examples of grammar concepts that we're learning currently in that unit. For my synchronous tools, grammar lessons and practice. So these activities can be completed collaboratively and independently on virtual whiteboards and chat, which could include audio or text-based chat, and through a video conferencing application. This could also include the grammar practice activities from Conjugamos, which also includes games. So they can play games for vocab or verb conjugation, which supports their learning even further. The next one is conversation assessments. So student-teacher and student-student conversations could be recorded for reflection and more accurate grading. This could obviously be completed synchronously or asynchronously, but I think synchronously it would be more effective and better practice for students to speak with one another or with others outside of the class. My last one here is video conferences with activities. So this kind of, again, ties into the grammar lessons and practice. But I could provide them with lessons in person through Zoom.us or a similar conferencing tool. This allows for the use of other activities, which can be improved through immediate synchronous communication. So my students can communicate with me and I with them, so that way it's just a little more effective in terms of how they're learning the grammar. For my collaborative tools, the first one was video conferencing and text-based chat. This is something that I think could be effective, especially with the discussion of grammar concepts or vocabulary. And it's kind of a good way to get immediate feedback for the students when they need that. Otherwise, discussion boards and blogs asynchronously would be a great way, also to allow them to create their material and reflect on each other's work. Google Docs or some other web-based document creator and editor. Video creation software, which could include iMovie, Screencast-O-Matic, or some other video creation software. Email is another asynchronous way. And then lastly, collaboratively, they could work on grammar, vocabulary, and verb practice, like I mentioned, through Conjugamos. My management of tools. The first thing that I thought would be helpful would be to introduce the technology and provide support. So anytime that technology is introduced to be used, it should be taught, especially if the students are unfamiliar, and then supported with either instructions or guidelines at some point, or at some location on a website or something like that. Number 2, I had requirements for assignments, obviously giving them the requirements so they know what they need to do. Number 3, instructions and checklists for any important processes. This helps students to kind of just follow along and know that they're doing what they need to in order to complete the task at hand. So I think that's very helpful. The outline of timelines and due dates, this lets them know when they need to have something completed, and kind of lets them monitor their time a little bit better. Number 5, I have that if the assignment is collaborative, student roles should be assigned or designated, so that way they kind of understand what they're doing in their groups. Number 6, a page in a learning management system or on a website with general technological support should be available at all times. I think this would be great. So just some general tech support that they could take a look at and just figure out simple problems. And that kind of reduces the amount of time needed for the teacher to be kind of supporting them in that sense, if something's already created permanently. Lastly, the general requirements with examples and non-examples for discussion boards and posts with included criteria for each prompt are also helpful. That way students aren't writing too little or too much or kind of being off task. It allows them to basically write what you expect to see without you having to say it too many times or without them having to guess. The assessment of assignments. There are definitely formative assessments dispersed throughout all learning, and it should be. This ensures that there is increased success throughout. If you're not checking formatively, you're not really going to know what to expect in the end. So it really helps to have a more successful summative assessment, which is my next point. And that should be for each topic. Could be a different format. Does not have to be a test or something to that extent. It could be a project. And that's just a check for long-term learning. Number 3, I have timely and consistent responses. I think this is something that's important to implement as the teacher. Make sure that you're responding to all students fairly and equally so they don't feel left out, and it kind of encourages them a little bit more when the teacher's responding to them. Number 4, encouraging student reflection and involvement. So getting students to ask questions and respond with or to their peers. And then B there, I have evaluation of cooperative partnerships and activities. So having them evaluate their cooperative work and then even the activity, which also allows them to reflect in other ways. Number 5, rubrics, scoring guides, and graphic organizers should be provided to support learning and activity completion. So that way they understand what they are to do. Again, they have something to follow. They know what scores they'll get, and it's very fair and obvious how they should be completing their work. And then number 6, I have student portfolios including collection and samples of work. So a collection or samples of work. And this is really a great way to assess assignments altogether. Students can compile activities from throughout the course and even reflect on their portfolios. So it's just a great assessment. Some of the discoveries I had of online teaching. I used to think that synchronous instruction in an online environment would be very difficult and ineffective. Since having taught in this course, I think it really worked a lot better than I was expecting, and students were grasping the information just as they would have in a face-to-face lesson, if not better. Number 2 there are a lot of opportunities for the same types of lessons that would exist in a face-to-face traditional class, but with modified assessments and management of learning. So it's really different. I feel like in online instruction, the teacher is less present physically, so students are kind of more likely to carry out their learning on their own, and the teacher is really just a facilitator, or at least that's an effective way. And then lastly, creating accessible lessons is interesting. This is something I hadn't previously thought about, but I thought it was really interesting how with UDL and some of the other things we read, all that went into creating accessible lessons, and knowing that it was definitely required because it is still a public school was intriguing. Lastly, some questions about online teaching. I have, how do we overcome technological obstacles outside of our control? How is discipline handled if students misbehave or do something illegal or inappropriate? How do we effectively monitor and prevent plagiarism? And how can I take a lot of the online instruction concepts and ideas and make them work in a blended classroom? Thank you.